R&D Accelerator platform, and also distinguished professor at King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. And I first of all would like to welcome you to this event that is called From Pledges to Actions for Corals. And then we're going to have a series of presentations and brief statements, followed by a panel discussion. And the context of the discussion is that now we have a new global framework for biodiversity action that was agreed in Montreal last year, and it's called the COMI Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And this has very ambitious objectives set to be achieved by 2030. But unfortunately, we have a record of missing out on the objectives of the previous decades. So if we don't have plans, clear plans to deliver on the objectives, then we will again face the risk of missing the objectives by 2030. So the panel is going to be discussing, and we're going to be discussing what those objectives are and how can we mobilize society to deliver on the pledges. So for this, then we have a number of distinguished speakers and panelists. So it is my pleasure to introduce Her Royal Highness Princess Salah bin Khalid bin Sultan Al Saud, who's the president of the Prince Khalid Living Ocean Foundation, who has been involved in coral reef research for 3 decades now globally. So thank you very much, Your Royal Highness, for joining us. And then His Excellency Ambassador Peter Thompson. He doesn't need introduction, but I think everybody knows His Excellency was the UN Secretary General Special Envoy for the Ocean and also a committed citizen of Fiji and a champion for oceans. We also have with us Professor Raquel Peixoto, that is Professor of Marine Science at the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, but also she is also part of the leadership of the International Coral Reef Society. So it's, in fact, she's attending COP as a member of the International Coral Reef Society. And then we have with us also Marie-May Jeremy, which is the Executive Officer of say CCAT. Thank you so much for joining us. And then the panel is finally closed by Nicole Trudeau, who is a strategic engagement and partnership specialist of the UN Global Fund for Coral Reef. So with this, I will start maybe to frame the conversation with a few notes on what details the Kunming Montreal Biodiversity Framework holds. But it's not working. No. Okay. Uh, yeah, so before I go into my presentation, I would like to give the floor to His Excellency Ambassador Peter Thompson to share a few remarks on the importance of meeting the goals of Kunming Montreal for corals. Your Excellency.
Thank you, Carlos. Your Royal Highness, Excellencies, all courtesies observed. Thanks for the opportunity of addressing you. The Secretary General of the United Nations says we have been at war with nature. And that's what it sounded like. And the time has come for us to make peace. So beautiful, the sound of silence. The time has come for us to make peace. And are we achieving peace? No, we're not. We're still at war, let's face it. We're all geoengineers. Every time we get in a car, we geoengineering our planet. Unless, like me, you've got a fully electric car. We've all been part of this geoengineering experience. We hate the word geoengineering. It scares us. But the fact is, we now are having to turn to good geoengineering techniques to try and get us out of the problem that we've got ourselves into. And there is a need, and I'm talking about carbon dioxide removal, which the IPCC says we must have if we want 1.5 degrees. Now, a lot of nature lovers, and I include myself in that, have been avoiding this for a long time, but the time has come We have to bite the bullet on that one. Of course, we have to keep pushing our nature positive contributions. You know, the mangrove replanting, the coral restorations, the seagrass planting, and the planting of forests. All that has to continue. And CDR is no excuse for mitigation of the causes of climate change. That has to also continue. But the time has come for us to bite the bullet on CDR, let's face it. And I know a lot of people in this room have been waiting for this time, and the time has come. And I'm going to be making very strong recommendations in that regard so that the robust science is produced before we get to the UN Ocean Conference in 2025. So that's underway. I just wanted to say that. The link between anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions and the warming of the planet and the demise of coral, the death of coral, is one of the most tragic narratives of our time. And if you come from a coral island like me, Fiji, and you know what healthy coral looks like, and you know what uh, dead coral looks like, it is really devastating because you're looking not just at the death of the coral, you're looking at the whole ecosystem that depended on it gone. So Carlos and I have been working for many years on this. He gives me hope. He says, "No, it's not going to happen." And remember that IPCC said at 2 to 3 degrees, coral is gone, right? And we're firmly still on the road to 3 degrees. Let's not kid ourselves about that. We're still taking our children in cars and buses down the highway towards 3 degrees, an unlivable world, according to the conclusions of the Secretary General and the best of our Earth scientists. So, we've got work to do. But we are doing the work, and that's wonderful to see. Now, if we talk about coral, and I'm sure many of you have know what it's like to be in the water and to see dead coral, which has just given up on the fight on either acidification or warming. But there are species, as we know, which are more resilient than that. And I was recently, in fact, just about half an hour ago, talking to one of my good friends from Indonesia who was showing me photographs of their nurseries of coral, which are just incredible what they have grown in 3 years in these nurseries. So restoration of coral reefs is a reality, but let's temper that with things like what we saw in Miami this year, where the surge of ocean temperatures that occurred meant that all that beautiful planting that they'd been doing over the last 10 years, just everything was just dying overnight in these marine heat waves. And they were having to get back into the water and pull out coral that had been planted many years ago to take it to aquariums on land before it died. So let's temper our enthusiasm with some of the realities that we're observing around the planet. But I refuse to accept, first of all, that we're going to go to 3 degrees. I have 4 granddaughters, and when I look into their eyes, I just can't imagine that our species would be so stupid that we're going to annihilate ourselves, that we won't make that necessary move to renewable energies in time. I just can't believe we're going to be that stupid when I look into their eyes, because it would be unbearable if I didn't believe that. Unbearable. So transition's underway, and I think the same thing about coral. I don't think we're ever going to live in a world where there's no coral. That's my here. I don't have the science for that, but in here, I don't believe that will be the case. So we have so much work to do in this field, and I'm so glad that there's so many people in this room who are working to those two things. One, to get us to the renewable energy transition as quickly as possible so that we don't go to 3 degrees, and also that we find the techniques to keep coral alive for our grandchildren and those that come after them. Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much, Your Excellency, for those words, and I fully share the sentiment. And then we are also trying to put science behind the gut feeling that we need to avoid losing coral. So we're going to match both the gut feeling and the science to be able to achieve that goal. But while while we went through those thoughts, then we also welcome the last panelist, that is Ignace Beguin-Villecoq, who's the climate champion team for lead and ocean and coastal zones. Thank you, Ignace, for joining us today. And I will then elaborate a bit more on what it means to achieve that gut feeling that we are sharing. I think they share across the audience that we should not give up on the hope to keep corals thriving in the planet. So, uh, how do we go from pledges to action to achieve that goal of not only conserving but in fact expanding coral reefs in the planet? So basically, corals, we know they're essential for not only biodiversity but essential for human beings, both the tropical shallow water corals but also the deep water corals that are also under threat due to climate change. And basically, we have 15 years to win this battle, and the projections that His Excellency Ambassador Peter Thompson alluded from the IPCC indicate that if we are able to contain climate warming to 1.5 degree, then we might lose 75 to 90% of coral cover. In fact, we have lost already about half of the global coral cover. So that means 55 to 90% of remaining coral cover might be lost. And if we then exceed 1.5 degree and then reach the upper bound of the projection of the Paris Agreement, which is 2 degree, so that's the safety boundary for our climate, then we might lose up to 99% of coral reefs. So this essentially means the functional extinction of this very important ecosystem and vital ecosystem for our planet. Now, just to dip a little deeper onto the IPCC and the 16 scientific evidence, when you really look at the uncertainty around these projections, the margins are far wider than in this simple statement. So the margins are between 30 to 99% of loss. So it's not 75 to 90. That's kind of the central projection, but the boundaries of uncertainty are much broader. And in fact, there's a broader suite of models that open even more the range of options. But in any case, there's no model that projects no losses or projects recovery. So we're faced with this projection that we might lose a significant fraction of the coral cover that we have. And yet, when we look at the targets under the Montreal Kunming Global Biodiversity Framework, there is no exception for corals. So there is no footnote that says, no, these goals do not apply for corals. But the targets are multiple, but one of them is that not only we are to avoid losses, but the pledge is to also restore 30% of degraded habitats by the end of this decade. Now, this seems to be in sharp contradiction to the projections of the IPCC. So then the world leaders decided on one goal, and the IPCC is projecting an entirely different trajectory. So how we are able to meet those two pledges from one side, and then the other side the projections, and closing the gap between the predicted losses and the climate change and the pledge of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework may seem impossible. And in fact, probably now it's impossible today, but that's why we need science, because it's through science and technology that we're able to redefine the boundaries of what is possible. In fact, those projections are actually projecting current capacity and current behaviors into the future, but we are not committed to continue to have the same limitations that we have today into the future. So that's something we need to bear in mind when we look at projections, whether it's the climate, the corals, that these projections are really projecting current behavior into the future, and we should not accept that we're going to continue to behave in the same way when we are aware of the dire consequences of continuing to emit greenhouse gases to the atmosphere and also other pressures on coral reefs. So basically, the window for the protection of corals is rapidly closing, and what we need is a Manhattan Project, this time not to destroy human lives, but actually to save corals. And recently, there was an article in an outlet called The Hill that is about politics in Washington that was called "A Moonshot for Coral Reefs," and it was calling off the U.S. government for not investing enough in new ways of conserving and restoring coral reefs, even though, as Ambassador Peter Johnson mentioned, we were witnessing a devastating loss of corals in Florida. So that's why we have CORDAP, and I'm going to share with you some key numbers of what we're doing at CORDAP. So can you please play the video?
Launched in 2020 by the G20, the Coral Research and Development Accelerator Platform, CORDAP, is the only international organization fully dedicated to funding global research and development for tropical and cold water coral restoration and conservation. We are focused on research and development, building transdisciplinary collaborations, committed to scalability and accessibility. We only fund solutions that can be mainstreamed and accessible to all. And we promote the participation of low and middle income countries. Our work aligns with and contributes to existing global agreements and targets. Positive, practical changes that produce measurable results. This is our goal. Since 2021, CORDAP has collaborated with 103 institutions worldwide from 31 countries, 44% of which are low and middle income countries. We launched our first Coral Accelerator program in 2022 to fund international collaborative teams with impactful ideas in coral conservation and restoration. $18 million worth of funding was awarded. 89 proposals were received in total, 40% led by the lower and middle income countries, 489 applicants, 51% of applicants of which were female. Each full proposal underwent international expert peer review. The result? 14 proposals awarded from 20 countries, 60% of which are from low and middle income countries. We began a series of scoping studies that have brought together more than 70 coral specialists worldwide to assess priority research and development investment goals in key areas to help save the world's corals. We initiated CORDAP study fellowships to build R&D capacity in low and middle income countries. We launched our second Coral Accelerator program, CAP 2023 in September, to continue funding projects worldwide that advance science and technology to conserve and restore corals. And we hosted our first artist in residence, Jana Winterin, as part of our Team Coral initiative that connects art with science. So what's next? You. Join our mission to save the world's corals.
Thank you. So we can go back to the slides, but we are already alive. We're already engaging with more than 100 nations, very strongly committed to raise leadership for the global south in coral reef research. And in fact, we invite you to join one of our events that CORDAP is organized, is called Unheard Voices, Raising Leadership for Coral Research for the Global South. And we're organizing a workshop on this topic in Nairobi together with UNEP in March this year. And we want to raise the profile of scientists from the global south that are already doing great research, but somehow they're not visible when international panels, organizations, and so on are sourcing talent from corals, but they're the ones that have most at stake because for them it's not just a matter of research, it's a matter of their own livelihoods that is at stake. So, how can we support the Commit Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework? Because it is obvious that without more research and science, we won't be able to meet the goals. So, basically, there are a number of targets in the Commit Montreal Biodiversity Framework that require our input. One of them is to restore 30% of degraded areas or habitat under restoration by 2030. And in fact, I would like also to mention the launch of the Coral Breakthrough that was announced 3 days ago, 4 days ago now, that was put together and coordinated by UN Global Fund for Coral Reef and ICRI with UNEP, and kind of quantifies the effort required in terms of the square kilometers of coral reef that need to be restored, and also the financial resources required to restore the reefs. But then all of that requires the input from science, and we don't have scientific capacity and technology that is able to currently deliver this restoration of 30% of the global area. So we also need to minimize impacts of climate change and ocean acidification. Of course, none of them will work if we do not accelerate our ambition to mitigate climate change by reducing emissions to the best of our capacity. But even if we achieve the 1.5-degree goal, still coral reefs are not safe. So we need to provide capacity to minimize the impact. We also need to help recover species that are threatened and also recover the genetic diversity of coral reefs that have been decimated by a series of heat waves. So one element of hope, for instance, is that the losses of about 30% of corals in the Great Barrier Reef in the heat wave of 2016 and 17, they have been mostly recovered by now. So the area loss is mostly recovered in the last assessment, but the community is not the same. So has recovered with a skewed distribution of corals that are fast to respond and they also are rapid growing. So we have lost a genetic diversity. We may have the same cover, but not the same ecosystem, and that genetic diversity is compromised. So we need to find also ways in which we would not have coral reefs that are composed of just very monotonous and few species, but they will continue to be diverse, both in terms of species, but also within a species have a range of genetic capabilities that can also ensure a future for them. We also need to ensure that activities that occur in the ocean, like aquaculture and fisheries, are not creating additional burdens on coral reefs. And for instance, in many regions, overfishing of reef-related fish, like fish, is the main source of impacts to coral reefs. So that is also part of our portfolio of contributions. And then we also need to help deliver the financial, technical, and capacity building pillars required to achieve the goal. So we are working with partners towards establishing an international global school of coral reef conservation and restoration that will have a global reach. And we have been just recently discussing with the Royal Highness to leverage on the network of collaborators that they have developed at the Prince Khaled Living Ocean Foundation to be able to achieve that goal. So that's one of our targets for next year, but that's something that CORDAP cannot do alone. We need broad partnerships, but that is the conversation is underway to establish that global school with also university partners around the world. So that's something that we will contribute to add capacity building to be able to deliver the technologies that we are developing. And also we need to share information, and we work closely with the UN Global Fund for Coral Reef and ICRI to deliver the advances that we're able to start from our projects and scoping documents, so they are shared with all of the world and they can be implemented anywhere. And of course, we need to remind that we don't have any financial boundaries to access technology. So by contract, all of the technology that is produced from CORDAP should be available without any licensing fees to be applied for coral restoration and conservation purposes. Yeah, so this is what we are doing, and we don't have the capacity nor resources to be able to restore 30% of degraded coral reefs. What we can do is to help on that goal by providing new technology and capability that can be scaled up, but we still have a huge financial gap when it comes to deliver those technologies. And I believe the coral breakthrough estimated the financial requirements by 2030 in about 20 billion US dollars. Is that 12? 12. I actually think that is an underestimate, but still seems to be a very large amount because the total funding pledge to achieve the goals of the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework across all components of biodiversity is 200. So then that will be about allocating 5% of the financial effort to coral reefs. But I think that probably will be a bit too low. So we probably need to raise that ambition as well to be able to meet the job. And probably for some reason, the oceans have always been 10% of everything. So 10% of research effort goes into the ocean, 10% of research funding goes into the ocean, 10% of researchers working in ecology, conservation, and earth sciences work on oceans. So we need to elevate that to recognize the 70% contribution of the ocean to the planet. And then we need to elevate also this 5% that we have says that is the bottom, the minimum to be able to achieve the goals in terms of achieving the goals of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework to a much larger figure, but we need your help as well with this. So with this overview of how CORDAP can help support and deliver the goals of the Kunming Montreal Biodiversity Framework, that I'd like to give the floor to Nicole, who will then be introducing Marie, May, Jeremy, and then Kirk's also her own statement. So welcome to Nicole.
Thank you so much. I am very pleased to be here today to speak on behalf of the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. GFCR is a global blended finance vehicle that's dedicated to coral reef conservation and resilience globally, and really dedicated to scaling private investment into coral reef solutions. GFCR focuses its efforts on what is termed as the coral reef refugia, meaning coral reefs globally that have showcased signs of potential resilience to the increasing impacts of climate change, and particularly thermal warming. And GFCR operates through two core funding vehicles. One is a grant fund, and that's managed by the UN, but that has also catalytic functions. It's not just grants, it's also technical assistance, guarantees, loans, in order to incubate and grow pipelines of bankable solutions for coral reefs. We also have another core vehicle that's managed by the private sector. That's our investment fund that has a target size of $500 million, and that's meant to issue debt and equity investments to scale up the size and impact of these bankable coral reef solutions. So, how do you invest into coral reefs? You don't. You invest into solutions, into enterprises and financial mechanisms that can address drivers of degradation that are affecting and threatening the resilience and survival of these coral reefs. So, I'll give you a few examples of these. Through our equity fund and through our grant fund, we support sustainable fisheries, aquaculture. We support sustainable agriculture through solutions like organic fertilizer factories. We support marine plastic recycling factories, wastewater treatment facilities, um, ecotourism enterprises, as well as financial mechanisms like MPA, sustainable finance mechanisms, and coral reef insurance, and also bankable coral reef restoration models. GFCR operates through a coalition approach. So it's really a public private coalition that's comprised of coral nations. We have 23 coral nations in our coalition that are hosting these resilient reefs that are prioritized for support, as well as donor countries like the UK, the US, France, Canada, and Germany, and major global philanthropies, which are leading the way in conservation efforts, such as Builders Vision, Bloomberg Philanthropies, Prince Albert Foundation, as well as our strategic partners like CORDAP, who are leading in global efforts to scale up restoration that are very complementary to the efforts GFCR are taking to address the local drivers of degradation. I'm pleased today to relay that we have just announced and approved our program for the Seychelles, and that is led by SECAT as the convening agent, meaning the lead implementing partner, which is convening a coalition locally and nationally of public and private agencies to support this coral reef positive economic transition in the Seychelles. And I am pleased to welcome Mary May Jeremy, the CEO of SECAT, to tell us more about her organization and the new blended finance program that GFCR is supporting for her country. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Good afternoon. Just before I start, allow me to apologize. I'm not feeling too good today, but I hope I should be able to come across clearly enough. So good afternoon, Your Excellencies, all colleagues. Thank you for this opportunity. So SECAT, just for a little bit of context, we are a conservation trust fund based in the Seychelles, and we work to mobilize resources in the space of biodiversity conservation, climate change mitigation, adaptation, but also the development of a blue economy sector for the Seychelles. So, in the past couple of years, and through our core programs, that we have in the Seychelles, we have been working with enterprises, small organizations, individuals in the space of blue economy. So we do have a grant mechanism through our Blue Grants Fund that we help de-risk new business ideas and innovation. Um, and so therefore, through the Global Fund for Coral Reef, we have found a new opportunity for us to work more directly to the critical ecosystems in the Seychelles, being coral reefs. And so, therefore, we have just been able to develop a new program that is called Oceans Resolve. It's a 7-year program which we have embarked on. And we will be working with government, national stakeholders, research institutes in the Seychelles, but also the private sector in helping them to develop new business ideas. We're calling them coral reef positive initiatives that we are going to then help to mitigate the impacts or the sort of main drivers of coral reef degradation in the Seychelles, and those namely being fisheries, coastal development, but also now, of course, the impacts of climate change through coral reef bleaching, etc. And so through our program, we will have a component, of course, that is around research in understanding the status of the coral reefs in the Seychelles. So we will be doing some baseline work as part of the grant component of the GFCR. But then, more importantly, we will be working to put together a pipeline of businesses. So, through the funding that we will be receiving from the GFCR, we will be helping to set up a blue business incubator, which will be in place to work with small enterprises, small, micro, and medium enterprises to develop business ideas. And we will be working in the Saint Anne Marine Park. And we've chosen this site because traditionally, when we've had coral reef bleaching events, it has proven to be one of the areas that have been a little bit more resilient. Um, and there is also a lot of economic activities in that park. So it's an opportunity for us to work with a whole host of stakeholders, not just conservation NGOs, but also businesses, private sector. And so, which really fits the brief for the efforts that GFCR is really trying to embrace in not just leaving cost coral restoration and conservation efforts in achieving those global targets to the conservation sector, but making it more inclusive and participatory to the private sector. And oftentimes are the ones that are really driving those degradation and causing the impacts on the coral reefs. And so, as we kick off the activities next year, we expect that we will have one or two bankable businesses that we will be able to benefit through some of the impact investment that will be available through the GFCR program. But also, we will be trialing out a parametric insurance for coral reef, and we will be working together with partners such as Aura for us to trial and see the best mechanism that will work for Seychelles. I think I will leave it here, and I look forward to receiving your questions on the panel later today. Thank you.
So I would like to initiate the panel discussion with Her Royal Highness Princess Hala. And with your 30-year record of collaborating on coral reef research globally, then can you share some thoughts on what is the importance of international collaboration to achieve the goals of conserving coral reefs? Microphone, please. Yeah. Ready?
Okay.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity and thank you for this important question. We're all here today because we realize that more needs to be done to save coral reefs worldwide. We all appreciate the efforts that have been made, the efforts that are in progress, and the effort and the ones that are planned for the future to protect and conserve coral reefs. But we also appreciate that we still need to do more. Let's face it, this isn't a challenge that any country can take on alone, let alone any single entity. So, as a global community, we've already realized the importance of working together across borders and disciplines, but it's a time to perfect that collaboration and to streamline that collaboration. In all of our initiatives at the Khalid bin Sultan Living Oceans Foundation, we opted for the international collaborative approach under our motto, Science Without Borders. So, in the past 23 years, we have worked with close to 300 of the world's best coral reef experts to circumnavigate the world's oceans, all searching for what we can do to make coral reefs more resilient. It was breathtaking for me personally to see how all of these scientists work together towards a common goal. They didn't always speak the same language, but there was a common long term goal that they wanted to achieve. Now we need to foster this type of collaboration on a global scale. So there are two main points that I'd like to make to aid in this effort. One being that there's a dire need to raise ocean literacy and societal awareness on the importance of conserving coral reefs and the dramatic consequences of failing to do so. Economically speaking, we need to invest in our reefs and think of it more as you would think of preventative medicine. So how much are we going to lose if we do nothing? How much are we going to lose if we do something but too late? How will the livelihoods of millions of people of coastal communities be affected if the coral reefs that massively support their food security and their coastal resilience are no longer there? Despite that, and I've mentioned this at a panel earlier this week, there are some economists that object to the high cost of coral reef conservation because the expenditure doesn't balance with the return. So to go on to the second point, that I wanted to make is that NGOs and governmental agencies really need to streamline their efforts toward finding innovative and low-cost solutions for coral reef conservation. There's no need to duplicate the work that's being done, but rather build upon all the successes that we've had. So improved communication among coral reef managers and technical experts is important, and continuous dialogue to achieve a consensus on the conservation priorities is essential. Initiatives like CORDAP play a pivotal role in funding cutting edge technology and for conservation restoration and should have a substantial increase in their financial resources, especially since climate change forces us to work and to move as fast as marine environments are deteriorating. So as a result, we need to rapidly advance the financial, scientific, and technical capabilities needed to address this coral reef crisis, and I believe that we could very much we could do this if we and expedite this effort through true collaborative work. For example, there are currently about 4,000 institutions that are implementing UN Ocean Decade programs. So imagine what that type of collaboration can do. So to aid in this effort, I would love to see the UN Ocean Decade Foundation's dialogue hosted in Saudi with the support of the CORDAP Foundation, of course, and this would provide a true opportunity for philanthropic organizations to unite in support of coral reef conservation targets. Lessons we've learned in the past taught us that international collaboration not only aids coral reefs, but can foster diplomacy and mutual understanding, build bridges between nations and institutions, and can lay the groundwork for broader cooperation on both environmental and socioeconomic issues. So, in this context, I'd like to thank CORDAP on their efforts to foster scientific and technological innovation through international cooperation. Thank you.
Okay. So, Her Royal Highness alluded to the cost benefit analysis and the economics of investing in corals. And often we say and the number might change, but there's about 600 to 1 billion people whose livelihoods depend in one way or another on coral reefs. But what we forget is that this is currently. But if we lose coral reefs, there's been some thoughts that maybe we need to invest in a few resilient reefs and let the other ones go to waste, unfortunately, and wait for conditions in the planet that will then allow coral reefs to thrive again. What we don't realize is this is 5,000 years at the very least for the climate system to go back to a regime that would allow coral reefs to be formed again. And then it takes about 3,000 years to form, or 4,000 years to form a coral reef. So it's not one generation, it's not 1 billion people. We are actually condemning about 200 generations of humans to suffer the consequences of living in an ocean deprived of coral reef. So the economics are not made for 200 generations. They are made for the current people whose livelihoods are at stake. And I think we need to revise the way we made those cost benefit analysis because we need to think down the road on the future generations. And in fact, Ambassador Thompson mentioned that for him and also for me as well, because I'm a grandfather, then the future generations have eyes, faces, and expectations in the presence of our grandchildren and granddaughters. So I would ask to ask Ambassador Thompson, because he reflects often on that responsibility towards the future generations, how can we support not just ourselves but future generations in achieving the goals? How can we empower the youth in achieving these goals? Uh, uh, we need the microphone again.
So what do I tell my grandchildren? My grandchildren range from they're all girls, so I'm a feminist. They range in age from 13 to 3. So obviously the 3-year-old is more of an emotional thing of just giving a good view of what that life is worth living and make everything fun. When you get to 13, you're reading the stuff, and you're asking the questions. And you're thinking, do I want to have children of my own if it's really going to be so terrible? I mean, that's what that generation's actually asking those kind of questions. So you've got to give them hope. You've got to show them that it's not going to be like that we're going to fight and make it a better world. And I've already talked about the energy transition, and that's the key to it. But the other thing I tell my 13-year-old is that I have faith in our species. I don't think that our species, Homo sapiens, sapiens, whatever that means, something to do with thinking, is going to be so suicidal that we will cross over that unlivable world which I was describing earlier. Why? Because the two great properties that we have are the ability to innovate and the ability to share. And that's what's taken us from caveman days, which were not very long ago, from caveman days to the space age. It was innovation and it was sharing. And if people think that sharing is not that much in evidence today because of the oil and gas industry making a $5 trillion profit, well, we have our way of sharing, which is taxation, right? And we have to find ways of diverting those profits to the human efforts that are required. So that's what I explain to the kids. Have faith in our ability to share and our ability to innovate. We're not going to be so stupid that we're going to take ourselves to annihilation. And what the other thing I say to them is that in that transition, there is fantastic opportunities for all you young people. The careers involved in the transition, if you take something like art and science, when I was a young guy, and if I said to my parents, I want to be an ocean scientist, they would have said, you just want to go snorkeling? Forget it. Go and be an accountant or a lawyer or something. These days, no. It's like, you want to be an ocean scientist? Oh, thank goodness somebody's going to save the world. Go right for it. We'll support you. That's how it's changed. So for young people, have faith, have hope, and we as older people have got to include them in the decision making. I'll conclude on that in terms of answering your question, Carlos. Sorry to be a bit long. What I always say is that and the Secretary General of the United Nations says the same thing, by the way, and he has apologized to the youth of the world for the mess that we've got them in. What I say is that we need suitably qualified, and I emphasize that, suitably qualified young people at our decision making tables. Whatever those decision making tables are, we need suitably qualified young people. And I give us an example like that. If I'm at a fisheries meeting and there's some young woman or man, they might just be 24 or something. They've got their PhD in fisheries, and we're trying to make a decision about IUU fishing or whatever it is. Their viewpoint is so much more valuable than mine for two reasons. One, they've got a PhD in the subject. I don't. That's actually an honorary PhD, that old one ever, but I didn't earn it the way they did through rigorous science, right? So their viewpoint is carries more weight than my viewpoint, even though they're a quarter of my age. Secondly, the decisions that we make they're going to have to live with the consequences of those decisions. I'll be long gone by the time those consequences come in, but they will still be there. So they've got more skin in the game. So that's why young people have to come in early into all these challenges that we're working on. I think I've answered your question.
Thank you. Yes. So, in fact, I think that this year I started my year with one pledge, which is that I will try to work towards all impossible pledges. I will try to work towards addressing one missing SDG, that is SDG 18, which is youth empowerment. So you need to empower the youth to be part of the solution because the future belongs to them. And Ambassador Thompson alluded to the importance of innovation. So Professor Raquel Peixoto is a leading coral scientist on her own right, but she's also playing a leading role in the International Coral Reef Society that gathers about 800 coral reef scientists from around the world. So what part research will have in achieving the goals of the COMI Montreal Biodiversity Framework?
So, research, as I said, it's like science is the only thing I think that can help corals because it can help us, as you said, achieve the impossible and change the trajectory. And so there are lots of things that are being tested by my colleagues. Of course, that is super important to mitigate CO2 emissions and local pollution. And for that, science is essential as well. But we have to address active restoration because we already have reefs that are beyond healing. And we also have to cope with the reefs that will continue to degrade. So different colleagues are developing different tools. So we have people working on understanding and manipulating the genetic tools and the genetic basis for corals to be more resilient. Some other people are developing different tools for restoration, different substrates, different disposition, different ways to restore corals, to grow corals. And some of us, includes myself, we are trying to develop probiotics and or other types of medicine that can retain the native colonies. And it's very important to highlight these science that it's, and all of them are nature-based science since from the genetic basis to using natural substrates to using the bacteria that live associated with corals, they are so important for them. And it's so important to also retain the corals that we already have, the 3D structure that takes thousands of years to grow and form the habitat that will sustain the services, the ecological services, and then we can build on that. And when we started, and this is why science is so beautiful and so impossible, when we started the first experiments on probiotics, I heard from everyone that it was impossible, and I didn't get any funding. For that didn't exist at the time. I had to fund my first experiments from my own pocket. We proved the concept and we kept going. We teamed up with other people. Now we teamed up with, for example, with Merck to manufacture it, to make it cheaper. We teamed up with engineers to create underwater systems of irrigation that work at scale in an automated way. And this summer, we had a pretty bad summer in the Red Sea. We could see the first results of using these probiotics and saving the native corals and keeping them alive in the real world. So we came all the way from the very basic science that was considered impossible to application. And this is what I keep seeing from my colleagues. And when we think about this as a society, our recommendation is that all these tools need to be developed because different reefs We will have different needs. And in many cases, they will need all these strategies to be combined and to be deployed. So we need all hands on deck. We need all the solutions. We need core app. We need platforms where we can develop these impossible science to go beyond. And we need science.
Thank you, Raquel. So I'd like now to give the floor to Ignace because we need innovation, but we also need leadership. And Ignace represents the climate champion team, particularly for land, oceans, and coastal zone. Can you share your views as to how can we achieve the goals that seem to be impossible of conserving and restoring the great coral reefs under climate change?
Thank you, Carlos. That's a challenging question, but no, I will maybe just explain a little bit the theory of change behind the core with breakthrough. And first of all, I should say, I've learned so much today on the panel, so thanks for that. The the, the breakthrough is not the end goal in itself. It's we are not fundraise. The goal is not to fundraise for 12 billion US dollars. All right, we'll speak to the few richest people in this world and we'll get the money. But the point is, how can we collectively think about we change the system on how coral reef are funded, and supporting the model of the GFA, or the Global Fund for Coral Reef. So the vision of the Coral Reef Breakthrough is to reach by 2030 um, tipping point in how the system operates. So by 2030, we hope that we will reach sufficient maturity in terms of demand, supply, and policy. On demand, to have, clarity from financial institutions, from the investors, from philanthropy on why and how to invest in coral positive yeah, businesses. On supply, we know that we need to scale the pipeline of investable projects that are the potential to positively impact coral reef, and very much the model that the Global Fund for Coral Reef is looking at, right? I think it's very difficult for a financial institution, private capital, to invest into mangrove and such, right? The financial returns are in existence. But if you go through the other way by improving financing coral reef positive businesses, this is where we can do the tweak and attract capital at the scale needed, change the system. So we need to build the pipeline. And finally, for this pipeline to be fully operative, to be attractive for financial institutions and businesses, we need to make sure that the policy is in place. So we have the right guidance by coral-rich nations to say this is a priority. We will protect this area. We will give you the tools, the enabling conditions to make this happen. So the Core Reef Breakthrough is launched to try to provide a North Star, a compass for all initiatives working on coral reef. It will be critical piece to check on where we are in terms of accountability and transparency collectively. How are we doing towards this goal of 125,000 square meters of coral reef protected and restored by 2030? We know that we need 12 billion, and we know every year if we are performing good or not too good. So yeah, I think this is what it is, and obviously, the mission of other partners like the Global Fund for Coral Reef and ICRI is to create this collective galvanized energies and synergy, and create synergies among stakeholders toward this shared goal, and I'm sure that this can really help, catalyze energy from the various stakeholders to make a change. We are already seeing that in the mangrove space, and I'm sure building on the existing initiative from corals, we can really make a step change by all looking and walking on the same path toward the same goals.
Thank you so much, Ignace. And then just to close the conversation, then I'd like to offer just a very quick statement to both Nicole and Marie-May to close the panel. So can you transfer the microphone that way? So just a very short statement because we're running out of time. Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe I just add on a bit about what Ignace is saying with regard to the breakthrough. I think the private investment piece is going to be a critical factor in bridging the coral reef funding gap. But I think the breakthrough also needs to catalyze and elevate the position of coral reefs on the global agenda for our member donor states, as well as the philanthropies. And we need to see greater ODA funding flows to go to coral reef action because we're not just talking about a single species, we're talking about an entire ecosystem that we're at threat of losing in our lifetimes. And so we need this elevated on the global agenda. We need greater collaboration and we need greater contributions from both public donors, philanthropies, as well as private investors. And that's really what we're aiming for the breakthrough to help mobilize and unlock.
Thank you. Mhm.
Um, Thank you, Nicole. And I think you've really just made it so much easier for me because, Seychelles, we're small island developing states. And I think it goes without saying that a lot of the things that we talk about sometimes in these big meetings really hit home for us. It is our reality and we're going through it. And so it is very difficult for Seychelles, being a high income country, sometimes to mobilize much of the resources and the support that it needs. So therefore, we really have to make sure that we're getting the support from the outside that helps us to bridge a lot of the financial and also human capacity issues that we're facing in coming up with the innovation to help us to continue to build the long-term resilience to climate change. And I think this is what we really want to achieve with our new program, Oceans Resolve, and we hope that we achieve it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I would like to close this session by thanking the panelists and asking to maybe stand up for a group photo while we invite the public to also thank the panelists with a round of applause. Thank you.